Hi, this is Steve Hargadon, and welcome to the Future of Education. It's Tuesday, July 26th, 2011, and we're so delighted to have you here. Thanks so much for coming, and our special guest is Kieran Egan again. Thank you, Kieran.
Thank you. My pleasure to be here yet again. I enjoyed the last one so much. Thank you very much.
That's high praise. It's most appreciated. The Future of Education is sponsored by my employer. It's now Blackboard, and the product is Blackboard Collaborate. As we said in the pre-chat, this is the first time we're using the new version, Blackboard Collaborate 11, of what used to be Illuminate. It's also sponsored by my Web 2.0 Labs project at web20labs.com. Coming up on the Future of Education, next week we talk to Jane Nelson, who's the author of the Positive Discipline Parenting series, and Mary McGuire about education, psychology, and democracy, looking at the larger changes to social structures that have taken place with increased democracy, and in particular both the family and in schools. On August 4th, a special guest, Jim Mayfield, who's a specialist in humanitarian work. We're going to look at self-determination and how humanitarian programs fail or succeed based on their willingness to allow self-determination. Again, some interesting parallels with education. Thank you for allowing me to explore them. August 9th, Douglas Rushkoff comes back on the show. His book, Program or Be Programmed. Helen Blankstein on Scaling Excellence. Jeff Piontek, the Dufours on Learning Communities. Howard Gardner, who's mentioned in Kieran's book, comes on in September. And lots more fun ahead, and new shows to be added soon. If you've missed the show, they are all recorded. They're up at futureofeducation.com in full Illuminate recordings or in the MP3 versions. Hope there's something there that you find of interest. Okay, so now we get a chance for you to let us know where you're listening from. So this is different than before. We used to tell you to look for the wand. Now you're looking for the little star symbol. And you click on that, and then you click on the map. Okay, and it's not doing it for me, so I'm doing something wrong. Oh, I've got to give you all permissions. Hang on. Rookie error. Okay, you now all have permission. So you're looking for the star to the left of the map. You click on that, and then you're clicking on the map. It's always fun to see where people are listening from. Feel free to shout out in the chat, maybe the time, the temperature, the weather. And if you would like to, I always used to use the wide layout in Illuminate. And here I found that the way to do that is I detach the chat panel. And you're looking for a little menu bar. There's a set of lines at the top right of the chat box. You click on that and you click detach, and it lets you pull the chat panel out and make it larger. Makes it a lot easier to follow the conversation. Lots of fun to see where you're listening from. We know that many of you are listening to the recordings, and we sure appreciate your taking the time to do so. So I listened to, Kieran, I listened to the recording of our previous interview, and it was fun to remember that at the time the book had been delayed in coming out. And that we were sort of wishing, that I was sort of wishing, and the audience was wishing that the book had been available at the time. And now, having read it, I told you prior to the show beginning, I just really loved the book. Are you getting sort of a similar response from other people?
From some, and of course they're the ones you hear from first, the ones who like it. You don't hear from all the, well, thankfully you don't hear from all the people who think it was grotesque. But it's been, as you know, the delay was a bit strange because a lot of the reviews came out before the book did, which was a bit unusual. So I was getting responses from people saying this looked like it ought to be a really interesting book, but where was it? And so it's been a strange introduction, and I've had just a few responses in the last few weeks, I guess. So it hasn't. I haven't had a lot of huge response yet because now the new reviews that will follow, presumably the book having been published, are yet to appear. So we'll see.
pretty sure this is not a scientific test, but I will tell you that as I read the book, I really, really wanted to be in that environment. I wanted that for my children, or I wanted it for myself. It was just that compelling to me.
Oh, that's kind. Yeah, I mean, a number of people have said something similar, that they would like to have an education system that involved a component like this, and of course, I'm on their side, you know.
So you have some slides that you are there in the room. I'm going to let you go ahead with those. There's sort of an overview of the ideas. I left the slides in for the Q&A, and let's use the arrow going to the right. And that will take you forward. There you go.
Oh, good. Okay.
So if it's okay, let's go ahead and have you do a little bit of the introduction, and then I've got lots of fun questions to follow that up. And then, as usual, we'll move to Q&A toward sort of the last 15 or 20 minutes of the show.
Super. Well, I'll try to make this brief because the basic idea is fairly simple. What we're trying to deal with is a problem. Well, I work with a group called the Imaginative Education Research Group, and our concern is to stimulate and engage children's imaginations and learning, and also to show that the imagination is not some, mind-wandering, entertaining feature of our activities in education, but rather is one of the great workhorses of learning, which we ignore at our cost. And one of the problems we discovered quite quickly is that the more you know about something, the more imaginative you can be about it. Again, one of the strange notions is that the imagination, floats around on knowing little or nothing. So one of our concerns was that what we tend to do in schools is teach many things superficially. And if you want the imagination to be engaged, you need to know something in depth. So I wanted to try and work out some fairly simple procedure that would ensure that everybody got some understanding and depth of something that's in the curriculum. And one of the solutions was to create, this is our quick overview, a procedure whereby early on in schooling, students are assigned a topic, and they will learn about this topic for the rest of their school life. Now, they'll only spend maybe an hour a week at this, and at least at the beginning in school, and they create a portfolio as time goes by, and they do this in addition to the regular curriculum. That is, there's nothing taken away from the schooling. This is just an add-on, a simple add-on. And also the portfolio is ungraded. This is an entirely voluntary activity for the children, but it's also one that they direct themselves very largely with help from teachers, parents, peers, older students, anybody who is willing to talk about their topic. So let me move on to a little example of Sarah, who was going to be a student who's going to receive her topic. And you see the picture there is actually one of the schools that has taken on the Learning in Depth project. And on the left-hand side of the picture, you see the kids who are getting it's called the reveal ceremony, which is revealed to them what their topic is going to be. And Sarah's got the topic of apples. And on the right-hand side, you see parents, siblings, other kids, and teachers who are witnessing the ceremony. And one of the points is to make it clear that this is a big deal, that children are getting in the ceremony the name of the topic that they are going to become an expert in, so that by the end of schooling, they will know as much about their topic as almost anybody on earth. This will be unusual for schooling situations. So Sarah's got a topic of apples, and over the years she will meet regularly with a teacher for suggestions about how to explore it, and she will explore resources with friends and parents, and I can see the slides have got something strange happen to them on the screen here, but I hope you can follow. And each year she will make a presentation of her portfolio to her classmates, parents, teachers, anybody who wants to listen, so that the expectation is as the years go by, these presentations will become more sophisticated and familiar. And over the years she'll study apples in terms of their biology. She'll learn there are 7,200 varieties, their geography, where they've originated, where they now grow in greatest profusion, physics, a bit of poetry, a lot of poetry might help, in literature about, in this example, we have Yeats's The Silver Apples of the Moon, the Golden Apples of the Sun, and the meaning of phrases like apples of my eye and the health benefits, genetics, ecology. That is, everything to do with apples can be a part of what Sarah is going to be able to study over the 12 years in which she is just, building her portfolio. And she could do field work, visit libraries, conduct experiments, web searches, pursue it any way she wants. And in the end, she becomes an expert. She will have gained knowledge and depth about something. And through the process, she also becomes something of an expert on learning, because she's had to develop a sense of agency that motivates her to learn. She's acquired all kinds of skills in the process of building her portfolio. And in the end, she has a truly deep understanding of something. And the crucial feature of this is that too rarely in schools do children get a confidence as learners, because they actually know something in great depth. Nearly always children are, in the classroom, always the teacher is the expert and the children are not. Now, any topic won't do, obviously, for a project like this. They need to be, the topic itself has to be sufficiently complex that the student can study it for 12 years. It has to have cultural ties as well as emotional ties. It has to be tied in some way with human life and history, in some ways that are far from trivial. And it mustn't be concerned with material that will lead to depression or violence, obviously. I thought of tools as a good topic, and then thought, oh, well, weapons might be another, but then, of course, realized you can't have a kid for 12 years studying how to hack other kids to pieces, so that became one of the criteria. And it can't be too technical, particularly at the beginning, because you can't have something like, the rings of Saturn, which might be a nice topic to study, but there's too much technical information required to actually get into it at the beginning. It can't be too general. A topic like animals is too varied. Tigers maybe are just a bit too particular, but the topic level of cats is very good. It has sufficient variety, depth, etc. There must be adequate local materials available in the early years. I remember mentioning fish as a reasonable topic to a man in Romania who was going to start what we call LID, Learning a Depth LID project. And he said, well, fish may be okay for you on the west coast of Canada, but it's not a winner in central Romania. Also, the topic needs to be acceptable. There must be a veto available to parents and caregivers. And there's a number of cases where things that might look okay to many would be a problem for some. And there's problems with it, and we'll investigate those, I think, as we go along. I think the main one that always comes up, I'll stop at this point though, is not the boredom actually, but the student should be given some choice in the topic, and we'll maybe come to the reasons why it actually works better if the topics are randomly assigned to the kids. Anyway, let me stop there, and we can deal with questions, comments, abuse later.
So we've gotten some good questions in the chat, and we will get to them. There are good questions, and there are ones that are on my list as well. There were two things that occurred to me as I read the book, sort of two cultural references that came out right away. One was Harry Potter. I'm sure others have mentioned that as well, right? The sort of the ceremony, the degree to which there's something very special that happens. Have others asked that same question or seen that same connection?
Well, some have recently. I confess, my daughter, who may be watching this, writes that sort of teen fantasy material, and I really like her stuff, but I haven't read the Harry Potter novels. But I have been interested that some people have mentioned not just that, but also there are some schools. I think it's the Waldorf schools also have an opening ceremony in which the older kids welcome the younger kids, and the way the Learning in Depth project works is that we anticipate there should be no more than about 100 or so topics in any school, so that after a few years you start repeating topics, so some of the older kids can then introduce, be a part of the ceremony that introduces the younger kids. I think anything that makes it clear that this is a big deal, I think is important, because it is a big deal, because the topic that the student gets, even though the particular topic at one level doesn't matter, because everything, one of the principles is everything is wonderful, if only you know enough about it. Part of the trouble with so much schooling is that it's so superficial that the children never get that sense of the wonder that lies behind a lot of the topics that fill our curriculum. So this is one way of trying to ensure that they get that feeling of wonder, and I think the Harry Potter notions presumably are picking up on very much the same impulse and interest and psychological mechanisms that I hope the Learning in Depth program will pick on too.
Someday we'll do a show just on Harry Potter and the kind of portrayals of adolescence and the like. But for today, we'll leave it at that. So the other thing that I was clearly reminded of was the deliberate practice, 10,000 hours, kind of genius in all of us thread that at least has been a part of the interview series and seems sort of culturally to be there as well. So does that play in well with the kinds of ideas that you have for the program?
Again, it's not a connection I had made earlier, but a few people have mentioned it, and it does make a lot of sense. Only because I think that the kind of intensity of engagement takes time. The kind of mastery that comes after a long time gives you a different sense of the nature of knowledge, and I think that's the crucial thing for the educational program that indeed may take 10,000 hours of a child's life in the end. I don't imagine they'll actually stop as soon as they reach the end of their grade 12 or whatever it is. In fact, one of the curious features to me is that a number of the teachers who've taken this on have become so interested that they themselves have started portfolios themselves on topics, which is curious. They may or may not put in the 10,000 hours. I don't know. We'll see.
The students have created their own portfolios? Is that what you're saying?
No, sorry, the teachers. So some of the teachers, when they see they're supervising the children's portfolios and helping them, but then they've decided that the kids are having so much fun learning about apples or the circus or whatever it might be, that they themselves, that is the teachers, they tend to go to our website, look at the set of topics we've got, and just randomly choose one and start building a portfolio themselves, working alongside the children.
Fascinating. Okay, so how many students are currently participating in Learning in Depth programs?
I wish I could tell you. I hear every few days now from people who are doing it. The trouble is, it's only 3-4 years old now. 4th year is beginning for some kids. Initially, 3 years ago, there were only 60 children, no, fewer than that, 30 children. So we had 2 classes doing it initially in British Columbia. The next year, there were 2,000. This year, starting 2010, 2011, it is many, many more thousands, and I have no idea how many. I know that there are programs in Japan, Australia, New Zealand, Greece, Romania, Iran, England, the US, and Canada, and a few other countries I don't now remember. So it's sort of gone viral in some peculiar way, but I just don't know how many children are now engaged in building their portfolios, who are what we're calling lid kids. Somehow, I think one of our Australian, Di Fleming, thought of the word lid kids, and it seems to have caught on. A lot of schools are calling the kids lid kids, and they give them a portfolio folder or a box or something, and and one of the strange features to me that I hadn't thought of is the children know each other not just by their names in the school now, but by their topic. So they assume that everybody has a topic, and it's like a totem animal, so that their identity is tied up with this. So it's gone in directions I hadn't imagined, and also to greater numbers of students than I had imagined quite quickly.
So let's talk about some of the ways in which, or some of the questions that came up, and specifically around topics. So the first question was, does the family have any role, aside from what sounds like maybe the ability to say a topic is not appropriate, but do they have any role in advance of helping to choose the topic?
No, not in choosing it. There's a lot to be said for the randomness. I mean, one of the trite comments I make is that in school, if we think something is important, we don't give children choice. We give them choice only if it's trivial. And we don't say, we're doing algebra today, anybody not want to do algebra? We just take it for granted. If it's important, then it has to be dealt with. And I think the assigning of the topics, there's many other reasons, as you will, anyone who reads the book will see. It's about a half a dozen reasons why the randomness works better. And indeed, in practice, we have found that out, that when choice has been given, it hasn't worked as well as when the topics are assigned. Sorry, I'm rattling a bit, and I've forgotten exactly what the question was now.
No, that's fine. It was whether the family has a role in the
Oh,
choosing.
yeah.
Another question that came up was, can they change topics? And you do address this in the book, and I'm curious, at what age can they actually kind of drop out or change topics?
Oh, they can drop out at any time they want. The changing of, because it's entirely voluntary. They can stop for 6 months. You know, it's entirely up to the students. It's ungraded. It's their choice and their direction of the topic. The changing of topics is an interesting one. Again, because we tend to assume that this will work the way, you know, things in school tend to work these days. You get bored of something after a while, so you change. This, I think, is much more like what I call I shouldn't say the Chuck Heston response to taking his rifle away, you know, from my cold, dead fingers. You know, imagine a child has put in 6 years of commitment to a particular topic. They're not going to want to change. I think we underestimate the degree of commitment that children form very rapidly to their topic. I've been astonished, actually. Within a few months, you know, the girl who's got cats is the cat girl. You know, the idea that she should become bored would be an outrageous suggestion to these kids. I was at a school gym a little while ago. There are 11 classes in one of these schools who are doing the LID program, and they'd taken up the whole gymnasium, and the kids had got their portfolio presentations all around the gym, and some of them were presenting from computers and things like this, and they had parents and other teachers and the other kids in the school all traipsing around looking at them. And if you had suggested to them they might want to change topic now, I think any of the children would have been astonished. They do have this sense that they own the topic. It's a part of their identity after a while. In fact, I found it very sweet to have, you know, little 5-year-olds coming up to me and saying, "What's your topic?" Because the assumption is, of course, everybody has a topic. It's part of, they have a name and they have a topic, and they, you know, learn about their topic. So now this may be just you know, as it were, early adopters, and this is a feature of the way they're operating, but there doesn't seem to be any interest so far in children changing their topic, because the more they're studying it, the more committed they become to it.
So just as a quick aside, it was very interesting to me in the book to hear your continued humility related to what's happening here and the degree to which you're sort of predicting what you think responses will be, but making sure that you're not necessarily claiming anything more than what you currently know. There's a note that there's a sort of a dialogue going on in the chat right now about standardized testing and test scores. I think it would be important for you to kind of communicate what role this plays in the larger scope of a student's day. This is not a program that displaces all other education. Would you like to explain how it works?
Thank you. Yes, I tend to take too much for granted that it's sort of obvious that it doesn't displace anything. It's a small add-on. Most schools that are using it at the moment put aside maybe an hour a week when the kids can work in the library. Increasingly, as time goes on, we find the kids do more work out of class than in class. So they in most places what we provide, or what the schools provide, is a portfolio, either a box or a folder of some kind in which they can store their materials, but they also give them a folder for traveling to and fro from home to school, so that at home, if their interest is cats or apples or whatever it is, and a parent or the guy across the hall or somebody has something that they might be able to use, they can carry it back to the school in their portfolio. So the school time is actually quite limited, and again, to my surprise a little, the amount of time the teachers have to spend on it is surprisingly little. Because I thought one of the problems with this would be just the logistics of how could a teacher deal with all these different topics. But there simply hasn't, in most cases, been a problem. And that with much sooner than I think most people would predict, the kids take charge of their own portfolio. I had one teacher say, she was doing it after a year and a half. She said, she really has nothing much to do these days. They go into the library for the lid time during the week, and she grades papers for other classes and sits there while they get on with it, and they talk among each other and they bring in stuff. That's the other thing that surprised me, because everybody knows what everybody else's topic is. They bring in stuff from things they've read or seen for the other kids. But this particular teacher was saying, oh gosh, one child came up to me and she said, she was quite surprised. Nobody had asked for her help for a while, and he said, oh, could you come over here and help me, please? So she followed him across, and this was in the library, and he said, I can't reach that book up there. And apparently that was the most help she'd been asked for a little while. Now, that probably is an exaggeration of most people's experience, but that does seem to be the norm, that relatively short amount of time in school, it doesn't displace anything else. Everything else goes on as normal. The impact does seem to be significant, however, because once it started in a school with one teacher, we often find other teachers quickly wanting to give it a try, because the impact on the kids is fairly apparent quite quickly.
So there's just so much good chat here, and we'll try and get to it all. But you mentioned the teacher was grading work while the kids were in their lid time. But the lid projects themselves, you're fairly adamant, should not be graded. Why is that?
Oh, human beings like to learn. We've created an institution that simply doesn't seem to believe this. That is, all learning in schools is coerced, one way or another. We test, assess everything, sooner or later in one way or another. And what doesn't happen in that process is simply the joy, the pleasure of learning for its own sake. Doesn't become a part of what every child actually experiences and comes to understand. So this is a simple project that that children can do or not do as they want, but they are supported by the school in exploring something in depth. And I think most people would be surprised at how, so far as I'm aware, very, very few children want to drop out, change their topics. Now, most of them, well, I was going to say most of them are young children, but actually there are children from K through 12 beginning this now. So in September, somewhere in North America in particular, there will be a class in every grade level starting this. So a number of people are starting it obviously rather later in the secondary school. And again, I'm rattling here. So I've forgotten the question again.
No, you're good. You're terrific. So it might be worth talking a little bit about the benefits here, because I felt like this was, for me, the most interesting part of the work, was kind of thinking about the ramifications of what this might do both for individuals and for our cultures and societies. So one of the first ones was that this kind of learning in depth provides an understanding of how knowledge works. And I felt like very easily we could describe our current culture as sort of relatively shallow in depth, very broad, but the ramifications of that may be that we don't have a good understanding of what real knowledge is, and that when we do, we tend to be more humble and more willing to look at the ramifications of things that we believe. It feels like this is something you feel strongly about as well.
Yes, thank you. You put it very well. Indeed, one of the products of the Learning in Depth program seems to be relatively quickly, not that you feel proud that you've learned more and more, but rather that you've learned how little you actually know about something. So one of the features of these kids is that they really are learning just how much knowledge there is about cats or the circus or apples. And they are launching into finding out more and more, but it does create a kind of humility. And it's very hard. I think the way you put it first also is very well stated, that we learn, the usual characterization of the curriculum is it's a mile wide and an inch deep, and that's the experience, I think, of my students. And what one doesn't get if you only go an inch deep instead of a mile deep somewhere is the difference between a well-supported knowledge claim and an opinion. And I think you just need to read comments in the on the internet on, for example, politics in North America, and you begin to realize people do not distinguish very well between an opinion and a knowledge claim. And one of the things that will not be true for these kids is that they won't be making that confusion, at least.
There was a little bit of a recursive thought process for me as well, because I thought we're currently in a lot of discussion about education reform. It feels as though we very quickly move into certain camps with regard to education reform, and there isn't a lot of looking in depth at decades to centuries of scholarship and thought about education. So I felt like it was, in some ways, it kind of peeled nicely back into the whole sense of how quickly we tend to polarize, oftentimes in public discussions, and how often there isn't this willingness to kind of humbly look in more depth.
Yeah, we're a contentious animal, and lazy, So this is just an attempt to create something that just pushes a little bit against those tendencies we have.
So there were a variety of other benefits that you mentioned in the book, stimulating the imagination, kind of gaining a sense of self, or what we might call wisdom, and then sort of a knowledge of the natural world. And that's one that really intrigued me, was this the degree to which, especially we had Carol Black on the show the other day, who created a documentary film called Schooling the World, and the impact of pulling young people out of villages in developing countries, and how disconnected they become from their natural environment. Do topics that are related to the natural world end up being really good ones for learning in depth?
Yeah. And in fact, I've come around to thinking that, because initially I had, if you look at the list, there's about half natural world, half cultural topics. I increasingly think the natural world topics are best. So, there's more richness, less problem. There's also established disciplines that will help you, and indeed the children can learn all kinds of disciplined knowledge. Not that that's a particular aim, but in the process of the pleasure of learning it, they will pick up a lot of these kinds of skills. And there's certain confusions come in with the cultural stuff that, particularly in the beginning, that might be avoided. But that's maybe not well informed, but it's an impression I'm beginning to feel increasingly, that we should stick with the natural world topics.
Do you find that schools tend to pick topics related to their local ecosystem or environment?
No, oddly enough not. Some do. We have another program called, I shouldn't be mentioning now, called Whole School Projects on the Imaginative Education Research Group website, and I have a book that is coming out on whole school projects, and those will draw more on place-based learning, local topics, etc. But the learning in depth, I think, in some ways, the dissociation from the everyday stuff around the students actually helps.
So we're not going to be able to cover all of the topics. When we move to chat, I hope those of you who have questions about the specific implementations will ask them, and I can tell that there's still some pushback on the assignment of topics. Craig, you'll get to raise your hand. But I wanted to look a little bit at kind of what lies behind this and behind the Learning in Depth program, and especially based on your body of work. So is this a transition concept? Meaning, is it a bridge or a step from where we are to something else because of its attractiveness to some sort of some existing philosophies of education?
Well, I wrote a book a few years ago called The Educated Mind, How Cognitive Tools Shape Our Understanding, which was published by Chicago University Press. And that has in it a whole set of ideas, an alternative conception of education, actually. And our website is dedicated in some ways to finding, practical methods of bringing this mode of teaching and learning into everyday reality in schools. But it's complicated, and it runs in conflict with what are, I think, the dominant ideas around education at the moment. So what the Learning in Depth project does for us is create what I sometimes talk about as a Trojan horse. That is, it's a relatively clean topic that people can understand how they could implement fairly straightforwardly. But to do it properly, it leads you into picking up on all the other ideas, the kinds of understanding and all the other stuff that's attached to that. So it's really an iteration of a particular conception of education that I guess I've been scribbling about for a number of tedious years.
I'm trying to bring the website up, and
oh yes, sir. Well done. Right.
Yeah, I apologize for that. That was I must have typed something in there incorrectly. So let me get back to we'll switch to Q&A in about 5 minutes. But with regard to the cognitive tools approach, you had written, all knowledge is a product of someone's hopes, fears, or passions, and if we hope to engage students' interests, we have to show knowledge in the context of the hopes, fears, and passions that generated it in the first place, or give it a living meaning today. So are you seeing that play out?
Well, that's what most of our work is about, trying to show teachers how this is actually not that difficult to do. So most of our work is concerned with designing teaching frameworks to help teachers take, everyday lessons on, the fact that alternate interior angles of a parallelogram are congruent, or teaching about eels, or math, science, whatever, and showing how one can engage human hopes, fears, and passions to show how these things, all knowledge is wonderful. It's just a matter of finding what triggers the imagination of the student. So most of the theory is about how human beings' minds develop, how their imaginations develop, and how we make the world meaningful to them. And not just meaningful, but really gripping. And that's the kind of work we've been trying to do. But it's a hard slog, because teachers are trained in traditions that are quite alien to that. And the Learning in Depth project's an easier one to take on board, but it has the implications for much more sophisticated kinds of understanding. Hello, have I lost everybody?
Sorry, that was me. I had my mic off.
So
I'm curious, were there any ideas in the beginning that you were kind of wed to that ended up dying, that you thought were going to survive? And have there been any ideas that came up that surprised you?
Now, do you mean in the Learning in Depth program?
Correct, sorry, in the Learning in Depth program.
No, I think there's a sense always one has with these things that, I wrote the book too early. I wrote the book as a way of trying to promote the use of the program, which makes obvious sense. But the trouble is then once the program gets going, experience teaches you a few things. But I would, well, already, if you look at the website, for example, there are quite a different set of, not a different, entirely different set, but we've changed a lot of the topics. I mean, that's one of the simplest things that experience has taught us, that there are something about some of the topics just don't work too well. And some that we were, anyway, so that's one area. But most of the others, I think, have been surprisingly stable, that it seems to work. Many people simply don't believe all this stuff about not giving the children choice. It's as though it offends, it's a part of the Constitution in the US, I think, that children are allowed to choose their own lib topic, because the teachers often become outraged. So we say, well, okay, you can give them some choice if you want, go to the website, let them choose 3, or, do it that way, and then you can discuss the final one that will work best with them, if you absolutely insist. But we have found increasingly that the assignment of the topic simply works best. If the children, think what you were interested in when you were 5, you need to be interested in it at 15 as well. That's not always the case. And if you give the 5-year-olds the choice, you get lots of princesses, dinosaurs, things that don't necessarily carry the child, their pets, whatever, through to 15. And there's a number of other reasons as well. But on the whole, there haven't been too many big surprises once it's gone into practice. And so it worked out fairly cleanly from the writing. The things that have surprised me are the kinds of things that I thought would be major problems, like just finding the time for it and having a teacher's time and energy. One principal surprised me a little by saying, look, we do lots of things in school. Not all of them are equally educationally valuable. He says, I like this, so we're going to do this and not do something else. So it's easy. Now, I'm not sure that relatively cavalier attitude will be common throughout the galaxy, but I was surprised that it hasn't proven the problem so far, to be able to implement this without too much problem. Individual teachers are doing it, sometimes schools are doing it, varying quite a lot.
When we talked before, you were a little skeptical of the impact of the internet on education. As I read this, I was just sort of stunned by the potential for students and teachers to connect with each other on topics. And I think I'm informed on this by the kind of proactive self-created development, professional development that teachers are doing by joining networks around things that they care about. And I had this brilliant image of students connecting with other students who were studying the same topic all over the world.
Oh, yeah. I think my skepticism probably is about the kinds of uses some people are. If you go to conferences on technology and education, and I was at one not long ago, you go away, you want to smash your ankles, largely because a lot of it is not informed very well by any concept of education. I think of, but sorry. Having said that, obviously the internet can be immensely helpful for this, and indeed we've talked about, we have a website in which we've been putting students' portfolios, those who want to put them on, and indeed I hope it won't be long before we have the Facebook on cats for lid kids, and they will be able to communicate and help each other build their portfolios from Facebook pages, all kinds of ways. Yeah, no, I think you're right. That's endless possibilities on the internet. So
those who know me and my love of educational social networking are going to make those connections and realize just how exciting that was for me. Okay, so we're going to shift to Q&A. And again, I'm going to turn my video back on just for a second so you can see. Here's my copy of the book. The book is Learning in Depth. And I'm sure you have lots of good questions. And Craig, feel free to raise your hand. To raise your hand, you click on the hand icon that's at the top of the participant window. Ryan's got his hand up first, and we'll give him the mic. You can also put your question in the chat, and if I've missed the question, please feel free to put it back in the chat so I can ask it again. And here we go with Ryan. I'm going to give you microphone privileges, and we'll see how you do. Give me 1 second here. Okay, Ryan, you should be able to click the talk button, and we should hear you.
Okay, is this loud enough?
Yes, it's a little soft, but we can hear you.
Okay, Kieran, from this book, I kind of got the sense that learning in depth really best supports the ironic understanding that you've kind of established there, and the romantic understanding, and a little bit less maybe your philosophic and like hardly at all for the mythic understanding. Does that seem to really be the way that it is to you, or am I kind of missing something there?
No, I would have thought it. There's no reason it can't equally support and be supported by each of them. Indeed, there is a chapter in the book indicating the ways in which mythic ways of thinking can be supported and romantic. Sorry, and this will be meaningless to people who don't know the Educated Mind or some of the other books, but it can use and be used by any kind of understanding, I think, equally well. I'm not sure how you inferred that it might serve the ironic best, but I'd be interested to hear, maybe on email or something later. But I don't think that's the case.
I remember this happening in the last interview, which is people who are really familiar with your work start asking questions that I'm not even sure I fully understand. But Brian, feel free to do a follow-up there, or to send an email directly. Let us know if you're good, or we can call on someone else. Okay, so I think we'll assume that Ryan is good.
Can you hear me?
Oh yeah, go ahead, Ryan.
Oh, well, what I was thinking is that it seemed like just the idea that you were talking about how really knowing something will let you understand the nature of knowledge. I thought that seemed like a really ironic thing. Plus, just the idea of exploring all, like, the extent of reality in one topic that really seemed to be just automatically for the ironic and romantic support or understandings, but the other two I didn't really see as much, or it didn't seem as strong, at least. I may be missing stuff, but that's just the feel I got.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. Yeah, the ironic, I mean, that's talking about understanding the nature of knowledge. That's, that comes gradually. So that would be, in some absolute sense, it would be at the end of the 12 years or something. So that's that's a reasonable inference. I hadn't understood why you say that, but that's interesting. Thank you.
So I've given Craig microphone there. Craig, go ahead. But Craig, you click on that talk button to get your microphone going. And if we're not hearing you, Craig, it may be that you need to go up to Tools, Audio, and run the Audio Setup Wizard for your mic. I'm going to go ahead and give the mic to Scott. Just 1 second, Scott. Scott, do you want to try?
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, Kieran, I'm interested in the issues that may arise with when multiple students have the same topic. So could you discuss a little bit about, would it be possible for more than one student in a class to be assigned the same topic? In your experience, do they tend to sort of compete or collaborate? And does that extend to students having the same topic in different grades?
Well, we suggest that the students in any one class have different topics, and we prefer that all, just to get a sense, some intergenerational work in a way, that you leave it 2 years or so before you repeat the topic in any school, so that you have presuming this will go on for a little while, you'd have a kid in grade 7, grade 3, and kindergarten might all have the same topic, and they could do some kinds of work together. How that would work out, we don't know yet, because we haven't had experience of that amount. But I think it works better to have each kid in the class having a different topic.
So Craig is back, and I think he didn't click on the talk button. Craig, do you want to try clicking and seeing if we hear you?
Are you hearing me now?
Yes.
Okay, good. Thank you. No, I love this idea of multi-year independent, but I'm holding on to this notion how important the topics are, and might it be valuable to assign topics after, say, a year's study? I'm thinking kindergartners, first graders coming in, and assigning topics after there's some knowledge of the students. So the question of when you assign topics, you could answer. And then the other question is, what levels of family diversity have the LID programs encountered to date? Because I think that would affect the topics.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. I think so far we've had kids just about every socioeconomic group. One of the first classes, indeed, was a group of at-risk students, and now I'm going to not remember the series of questions. You also asked about. I should have written these down.
You put them in the chat there.
Oh, sorry. I'll never find it. Oh, I thought initially that we should leave this maybe till grade 3 was one of the early thoughts, because kids then had learned how to read and write and could do a bit of they got some skills already, but the number of the teachers persuaded me, no, that the kindergarten teachers said, no, we can do this. This will be fine, and we'd enjoy doing this. It'll be good. And indeed, it seems to have worked well. The assignment is not aimed at knowing the personality of the child, as it were, so that we assign the right kind of topic. The underlying principle is that any topic will do for any child. And that might seem bizarre, but it's how it works, and it works surprisingly well. Everything is wonderful. And all you need to do is know enough about it. Some people said, well, gosh, what if the child's already really interested in spiders? Why do they have to do, animal or cats or apples? And one reply is there's no constitutional requirement that a child can't be interested in more than one thing. So it's not going to deprive them of some interest. It just adds a new interest. And that's part of the function of education.
So I've given Joe microphone privileges. Joe, you click on that talk button at the bottom of the audio and video window.
Okay. Mr. Egan, quick question on your distinguishing between opinion and knowledge. I usually forewarn my own friends if I have too strong an opinion about anything. I usually have not thought about things enough, and that sort of led eventually to me comparing everything to atoms, of which balanced ones have a third of protons and electrons, and there's a divvied up, and protons and electrons, a third of each. They seldom see eye to eye. They have opinions, whereas knowledge seems to be in the center, those who have learned to debate either side of an issue. Is that your basic understanding as well, or try again explaining how you feel the difference is between opinion and knowledge? Would you mind?
Had we but world enough of time, and of course, philosophers have been arguing things like this for 1,000 years, and I only mean it, and it's a dangerous distinction to make, but I mean it only in a relatively simple way. That is, what one does see in a lot of people is the inability to make any distinction at all between what they happen to believe in and something that is hooked into the universe. So and of course there's a continuum from the crudest kind of opinion to the most, securely established knowledge claim. But of course, and we know that even the more securely established knowledge claims are not infinitely secure. It's just that there's a continuum there, and I'm just trying to suggest that one of the things that the Learning in Depth project can do is give you a better sense of what kinds of claims one can make and how they should be distinguished from more casually formed opinions and beliefs.
That was a part of the book I particularly appreciated, especially having spent a fair amount of time in the last couple of years reading books on cognitive issues and the degrees to which we end up not necessarily seeing things the way they are. Shamini, I've given you the microphone. You click on that talk button in the audio area to turn your mic on.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I'm doing my PhD on the imagination of teachers because I think it's important that we bring that into the education of teachers. And I just want to know if you have noticed any kind of shift in the mindset of teachers who work with these children in the LID programs, and whether these changes have any transference to how they generally teach in the classroom.
That's an interesting question. Not yet. And I think part of the reason is, of course, that the teachers who've taken this on initially are the kinds of teachers who, maybe are more inclined to, have initiative and imagination anyway, because they're taking on something that there is no particular support for in the galaxy. So I don't know. My suspicion is that, the one thing that most of the teachers have said is that they've never had conversations with their children of the kind that they are having with these kids who are doing the LID program, which is also something a lot of the parents tell us as well. But that itself, I'm not sure makes quite. It wouldn't help, I think, write your PhD. We don't have enough information, I'm afraid, at the moment.
Ryan, I've given you microphone privileges. Go ahead and see if you can talk.
Okay, check. You got it. Is it still working?
You're coming through, but very soft.
Okay, I'll try to talk a little louder. Okay, so one thing that I was a little bit concerned about with this is when I was reading the book is that the end of the year presentations that you described, I was kind of imagining like, kids kind of being, drug out there and, kind of forced to or show their trifold that they've made or something like that. And it didn't, in my imagination at least, it didn't really jive with the effortless learning spirit that the rest of the thing had. Can you kind of maybe describe the presentation in a little more depth and what it might look like and how it might work out so that it feels effortless like the rest?
Oh, I have no idea how it will be done. The ones that I've seen have been much more, I was at this place a little while ago where one kid who was in, I think, grade 6 was giving his presentation to the grades, I think looked like kindergarten to grade 3 kids, and his was on ancient rockets. That's the part of the topic was, and he was explaining to these kids in great excitement how the ancient Chinese had invented gunpowder, but the problem with gunpowder was that it just blew up, and what you had to learn was how to make gunpowder blow up slowly, and that's how you'd be able to have a rocket. And the little kids were absolutely absorbed as he was going through his PowerPoint slides explaining it. Now that's one example that it's not effortless, and that of course he had to do a fair amount of work, and other kids in this place had done a significant amount of work making their presentations. Some were entirely visual ones. They just laid them out on pasteboards and they were willing to talk about them. Some were quite astonishing, actually, and a number were on computers for presentation purposes. So I'm not sure that there's any required form for this. In larger context, we'd imagine something like a conference where you'd have a bunch of sessions laid out and you could attend the ones you wanted to and miss the ones you don't. Initially, I'm sure they'd be boring and terrible in many cases, and I'm sure as time went by they would get better and better, so that the kids will be also learning something about how to do this in the process and how to present things publicly and how to speak in public. But no guarantees of effortlessness. And I don't think, as Sarah, as it were, is learning about her apples, it's effortless at one level, and that she's presumably enjoying it, but she's having to work very hard. And as time goes by, the kinds of commitments she's going to become involved with are going to be not insignificant. So anyway, but thanks for the question. I haven't given enough thought to the varieties of forms the presentations can take.
I imagined that in this environment that there would be a lot of support, even given student differences, so that students may be at different levels. But I sort of had this intuitive sense that these would be very supportive activities. Have you had any presentations, and have you noticed that as a theme?
No, I've never actually been, except in the one case, to the presentations themselves. I've seen the results in a few schools, and I've heard reports, but I really couldn't answer that. I don't know.
You do say that you think that schools may be transformed by learning in depth. What do you mean by that, and is it playing out?
Well, I mean, that's the advertising piece at the subtitle of the book. The main expectation I have is that if you have a bunch of kids who suddenly know a huge amount, the school is going to become a repository of vast amounts of knowledge. That these kids are going to be like no kids who have ever been through the school system in the past. They will be experts on things. So you have a whole school full of experts. Now, the same woman in Australia I mentioned earlier, Di Fleming, suggested that what they should be starting to do is have call-in shows for the local community so that the kids can be, we will answer questions on the following X number of topics and see how that goes. So that's one. I think the transformation in one kind is like that. The other is the kind of community that occurs, that the kinds of interest level that the kids show, the fact that already we're seeing significant differences in the ways kids deal with other subjects outside of the LID program, that they seem to be more energetically engaged in things. They bring their LID knowledge to play on new and other subject areas, etc. So I think, again, remember, 3 years is not a lot, and I suspect that we'll see a lot more of this.
So we've reached the end of the hour. It's always a hard moment, but thank you so much. I'm clapping for you. That's the I'm hovering over the show of motion, and then I click on applause. That's applause, Debbie. I'm afraid we're gonna close off here because we make a commitment to being an hour. But maybe you're thinking you're clapping and you're raising your hand. Yeah, it's not the raise hand button, but it's to the left. It's the emotion button, and then you go down to applause. Anyway, Kieran, thank you so much for coming on the show again. The book is Learning in Depth, a simple innovation that can transform schooling. We've been talking to Kieran Egan, and again, I really loved the book, and probably like many in the audience here, can't wait to see how this evolves. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Steve. As usual, you do an incredible job. Thank you.
Oh, that's nice of you. I appreciate it. See, that's the kind of feeling I think will exist in those presentations, mutual admiration societies. Coming up on the Future of Education next week, Jane Nelson and Mary McGuire talk about education psychology and the changes to our cultural institutions with increased democracy, and then Jim Mayfield talks about humanitarian programs, self-determination, and schooling worldwide. Thanks everybody for joining us. Thanks Kieran again, a terrific show. Take care everybody. Good night.
Good night, thanks.
I've turned the recorder back on. You talk about there being emotion and energy in the education debate, raw nerves and enthusiasm. Why do you think that is?
Sorry, when you're saying the education debates, you mean the arguments that go on, the hostilities?
The hostility, the emotion.
Yeah. Well, I did a thing called Why is Education So Difficult and Contentious? An article, I think, is in Teachers College Record or something. And partly it's because all these things are in the end rooted in what we conceive to be, the way the world ought to be, and there are, these fundamental rooted ideologies, and education is tied into these for most people, and so all the usual things that you see going on, particularly vividly in the U.S. Political scene at the moment, are played out also in education, and particularly it's been this battle between what we talk about as traditionalist ideas and progressivist ideas. There's a wonderful book written by a man called Stephen Pepper in about 1944. It didn't do very well. It's called World Hypotheses, about how people have rooted differences in their view of the way the world is. And I think most people are unaware of the theories that they hold. They think they see the world as it is. And they're really dangerous people, who think they see reality directly and are unaware that they hold theories. And so they just imagine that anybody who disagrees with them, it's not that they have a different theory, it's that they're evil or wicked, and so it's not easy to deal with that stuff, I'm afraid.
In the back of my book, in one of the blank pages, I actually drew a chart of the idea 1, 2, 3, and then idea 4. So I could map everything out and make sure I actually fully understood it. Ryan asks, what chances are there that this idea will be taken and twisted or changed into something else by other educational paradigms to the point where it misses the point?
Yeah, that's a fear. My hope is that I made it as simple as possible, so that there wasn't too much chance. But already, see, the simplest is people who say you've got to give the children choice, so that they give the kids a choice in their topics, and some of those they have difficulties. It runs into a bit of others I don't know about. I've heard of. In fact, it's been interesting to me that my colleagues, some quite prominent people in education, have been very kind to have written about the book, but they've all said, of course, I do it differently myself. And I think, well, you got to get your own idea and do it. Why would you do it differently? Never I find adequate reasons for the changes, and an inadequate recognition that there are sort of fairly fundamental reasons, educational reasons for doing it this way. But who knows? There's no protection, of course, on things like that. And I'm sure we'll see. If we do see more, we'll see some very strange iterations of it.
Well, I think one of the things you're pretty direct about is that we need to, in going through change, you need to move from one step to the next natural step, or to something that will be perceived as a positive adoption. And here, specifically, the traditionalists and the progressives should both see something of value that brings them to this next step.
Yeah, and that's so there's a sense in which it's been, I've tried to think it out in a way that would not be offensive to people. But at the same time, I wrote first, I think, in 2008, there's an article appeared in Educational Leadership, and the Educational Leadership people have an online discussion of the article, and of the something like, 20-odd letters that came in very quickly, I think about 15 of them were hostile to a degree that I simply couldn't believe. First, the Muslim, they just said it's impossible to implement. Well, time has shown they're wrong, at least. But some of them, finishing up with things like, "You, sir, are a fool," and a few of them took it to mean that. Another one thought that somehow making children was one of the phrases, making them learn a single thing was, again, a sort of contravention of their civil rights, I guess, in some way, but that somehow it was narrowing them. They should be allowed to roam free across the galaxy. And indeed, it's hard to say, well, they can continue to roam free. It's just that in this case, they're going to learn something in depth as well. That doesn't detract from their education in any way that I can detect.
Yeah, I think you're very thoughtful in the book. At one point you talk about our education today being kind of a parody of education. I don't think you hold any punches, but at the same time, you're very balanced and you're very thoughtful, I think.
Well, that's kind. Thank you. We can continue our Mutual Admiration Society, I guess. And I see Lenny Wax is also down here, as making similar comments.
Okay, I can't tell if this is a raised hand or was leftover clapping, but I'm going to give audio to Snyder Sensei. And if you wanted to ask a question, please feel free to go ahead, and then we'll try and be sensitive to Kieran's time here and maybe wrap up.
Sorry, sure. I just was wondering if Kieran could speak briefly to if the Imagination and Education Group had a conference this past July, and if there's anything else upcoming with the group that he is director of, in addition to Learning in Depth.
I wish I could answer that. Certainly we did not in July because of all kinds of problems. But on the books at the moment is the potential for one on the island of Rhodes in Greece next May, which I'm eager for. But we're not quite sure. We have a limited number of people and a limited budget, and one of the dangers of you just have to work out what's the best way to spend your time. Some people feel as though our conferences have done their work. We had about 10, I think, from mostly in Vancouver, some in Australia, and one or two other smaller conferences in other places. But I'm not sure what we're going to do, but we will obviously advertise them as soon as we can on our website. We will be having a full day presentations at Collingwood School in North Vancouver in October. That's all mentioned on the webpage, but that's not a full-scale conference or anything. But I'm not sure at the moment. If somebody gives us lots and lots of money, sorry.
No, I was just going to say, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. If somebody gives us lots and lots of money, then we will feel more confident to put on our conferences on a larger scale.
So speaking as the king of virtual conferences, please let me know if you would like to do something like that. I'd be certainly glad to help make that possible.
Oh, interesting. I'd not thought of that. Thank you. We will be in touch, as they say.
Okay. Hey, let's close it out. Thank you so much. That was terrific. Appreciate you staying on a little bit later. I'm sure your grandchildren...
Thank you.